Everyone has moments in life they can't just stop thinking about. They can be embarrassing things, like that one time you face planted in front of a group of teenagers, or something amazing like the first time you hosted your family for the holidays. And on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, hosted by me, Keke Palmer, and presented by BMW, we know to savor the good memories and let go of the bad. And one thing everyone remembers fondly is their first time behind the wheel of a BMW. So come join me and BMW this summer as we explore pop culture moments and topics you just can't stop thinking about on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, sponsored by BMW, the ultimate driving machine.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
Each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie or a television episode that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is writer Rachel Reeves. You have seen her work all over the internet in places such as Rue Morgue, Consequences of Sound, We Are Horror Zine. She's also co-host of the Losers Club podcast, and she is a self-described vinyl gremlin at Record Exchange.
That is accurate.
Welcome to the show.
Hi, you guys. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
We're so excited to talk with you. We'll get to this in a bit, but I love horror scores. I love music. I love all things about that. So I'm super excited to talk to you about that part. But before we do get to that, let's bring it back to the start. How did you get introduced to horror?
So I feel like I'm a bit of a late bloomer when it comes to horror. My parents were pretty conservative, not politically conservative, like what they were exposing us to. And I didn't have any older siblings. So I think I didn't get into horror really until I was in my teenage years. And I kind of just found it on my own, and I would have to sneak watching it because, my parents they wouldn't even let us watch The Simpsons. Like that's that's like crazy to me now, but yeah, they wouldn't even let us watch The Simpsons. So I had to kind of sneak into stuff. And most of that happened while I was babysitting because I would be at other people's houses.
Yep.
So that's kind of how I got to it. But once I started, it just kind of snowballed. And once I kind of had the autonomy that comes with, being a teenager and having a driver's license, the floodgates opened and I've never looked back. And I've been a huge fan ever since.
Does your dad have all those beer cans? Is that your dad that has like ridiculous room of beer cans
Yes.
and collection of beer?
That's my dad. Yes, he is a extremely avid beer can collector. Has one of the largest collections in the United States. It's very weird.
Oh,
but
wow.
Yeah, I grew up with that and it's
that's why it makes me laugh. Like, I don't know why in my head, like beer guys, it would be like, oh yeah, they like horror. There's no data for me to have that be like a correlation. I'm just like, yeah, he likes beer and cool cans. He must like horror movies.
I will say, what I get from my dad as far as it comes from movies, he's very much into action movies. So
Okay.
like anything like Stallone, Schwarzenegger, just big muscles, like he's into that. He's also into like Star Trek and like science fiction stuff. So there are some elements there for sure. Mm-hmm. Like I did see like Predator growing up, and things like Commando.
Okay.
So there's some crossover there, I think.
Yeah.
But
that is always so interesting to me, where like families are like, you can't watch horror, but you can watch these action movies, because Predator to me is a horror movie.
Oh, for sure.
And it's just it's like, that is always so interesting to see like what people consider, like what parents are like, you can't watch this, but you can watch this. It is just so interesting. It's like, it's just fascinating.
And even my mom, like, she would love to watch like Masterpiece Mystery on PBS.
Oh, hell
so
yeah,
like
Masterpiece Mystery.
So like all of like the Poirot things and like all of those BBC murder mysteries, Agatha Christie kind of stuff. So that, I mean, there's murder in that. And so there was elements of it. So it's not a huge surprise to me that I kind of pushed it just a little bit further and gravitated towards horror. But yes, you're exactly right. It is very weird to be like, oh yeah, you can watch this. But like The Simpsons, like, oh God, no. Like, makes no sense.
Besides talking about your dad, so like, what were some of those movies you watched while you were babysitting that you got to watch when you weren't at home? Do you remember any of those? Oh yeah,
so I think when I really started getting into it, yes. So I could drive, and I would go to on my way to wherever I was babysitting, whatever church family's kid that I would be watching, somebody my family knew from church. I would stop by at Albertsons, and they had like a little tiny video, like VHS rental, and it would be Scream, it would be The Faculty, and Cruel Intentions, and Disturbing Behavior. So like I was just at that right age, I think, for that era of horror. And those covers, I remember them so vividly. And so that's what really got me into it. And it wasn't till a lot later that I started digging into older stuff, because I had never seen like Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, that all came later for me. It really started with that kind of early 2000s, super late 90s stuff that I was catching up on. And I also do remember seeing American Psycho in the theater with that was like my first like group date, which is really funny. That was like a very awkward group date. I can tell you that.
Sorry, that's my cat. Let me just mute that real. She's trying to get out, so she's hitting the door stopper.
Oh, that's what that is. Cute.
I forgot she was in here, so I was like, all the time. Like, it shouldn't
not an
surprise me.
episode of Scarred for Life without Misu deciding to be involved.
I love her.
She's great.
You can have her. Just kidding. I love her forever.
That's hilarious.
She's the best.
Okay.
Anyway.
So I want to hear about this group date to go see American Psycho.
Sure.
A group date.
A group date. And so I mean, I don't know what year it came out, but I feel like I was like 15 or something. I was definitely, because I remember.
Like 2000. I think it was like 2000 is when it came out, I think.
So I was 15. And it's so funny to me because I remember the girlfriend I went with, and her name was Nicole, but I have no idea who the guys were, which is funny. So apparently that didn't last or whatever. I don't know. I think it was like a guy she was dating and then just one of his friends. So I don't even think I knew that guy, but they were like, oh, let's go see a scary movie. And I was like, sure. And like, what's American Psycho? I have no idea. And so we went to that, and I had been watching a few things around that time. I was starting to get into it, but I had never seen anything quite like that. And it was a bit of a like, just, you leave the theater and you're like, oh, okay.
What the fuck did I just watch?
Yeah, cool, guys.
Just like the whole thing, like very sexually aggressive. Like,
oh yeah,
Christian Bale running naked with a chainsaw. Like
exactly. Not really like
him in the mirror, like fucking the girl with his like going like this in the mirror, like staring at himself. And I was like, I saw that movie of an inappropriate age, so that has a lot of memories.
And I think I just had this image of like, oh, you go to like group dates with like boys and you just like make out in the movie theater. And this was not, this was not that movie. This is so it really just like shattered all my expectations of what you do with boys in the movie theater.
That's hilarious. That is hilarious.
I was sitting there very quietly, like gripping her seat, like,
yes, it was so awkward.
Am I supposed to laugh or not? Because it's a kind of a funny movie, but in a really fucked up way. So when you're 15, you're like, this isn't funny.
No, and I didn't know horrific. This guy that I was with. Like, this was like the first time I had met him. And it was like, oh, this is a great great,
Don't
get to
come
know
near me,
you.
sir.
Yeah, like, okay, cool.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Wow.
that was a good, I guess, reality check, I suppose.
Wow. That's incredible. So, do you remember what your very first horror movie was, though?
Well, it's so funny because I do remember like things that scared me, but they weren't always horror movies. Okay, so one thing from a very young age that terrified me was specifically the Jaws theme song. Now, I had never seen Jaws, but I knew that it was a shark movie, and my dad would. I was not an early riser as a child. I'm still not. And my dad would use that song to wake me up if I wouldn't get out of bed.
God.
And so he would, he'd like come into my room and be like, da 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 da. And so it would cause me to like jump out of bed. I'd be like, I'm up. Like, don't get me. Because if I didn't get up, he would be like, the shark's going to get your toes. So,
That's
so I was
amazing.
always,
I love your dad sounds both like a lovable scamp.
100%. That is 100% accurate.
Wow.
And so
you never saw Jaws, but he was like, the shark's going to get your feet.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Jaws is going to get you. And so for like, I didn't see Jaws till I was an adult because I was so scared of just the music of it and like what it was. And then, so that's a weird one. And then also I remember seeing E.T. as a kid and that really scared me. I think it's so funny to find out that that's kind of common actually. Like the scene where like the government comes into the house.
Oh my God.
Like, terrifying. Yeah.
Someone posted that picture the other day of like E.T. like on the side of the road. And I know people put that as the funny reaction meme, but it always makes me very upset.
Yeah.
Because it's like the most upsetting part of the movie. But
so scary.
yeah, E.T.'s fucked
and when
up.
he's like in with the stuffed animals, like
Oh
I
my
had tons
God.
of stuffed animals as a kid. So like
That's the scene for me.
I was just not, I was not into that. So yeah. And as a really young child too, like Snow White, I think it sounds so funny to say, but yeah, when like Maleficent's in the fireplace and she's like, Aurora, like I would always have to hide behind the couch. My mom would always tell me how I'd have to hide behind the couch because I couldn't stand that scene. So
That's a good.
Wait, Snow White or Sleeping Beauty?
oh yeah, sorry.
Am I getting my
yes. Was it? Yeah, you're right.
Sleeping Beauty.
Sleeping Beauty?
Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
I can't get, I also get myself confused. I was like, who is who? Who is
That's
who?
a good
Anyway.
creepy moment, though. Like, the moment you said that, I started thinking back to when I was a kid watching that and just being like, there were moments of horror that were put into the cartoons, and that was absolutely one of them. The way that whole thing is shot up into her pricking her finger, it's staged like a horror movie.
Totally. And then like Secret of Nim, I know you guys have talked about that one, but like that one was had some really scary stuff in it. But yeah, and then one of the first actual horror movies I do remember seeing was Christine.
Oh.
But I think like I loved that though, because I was really into Grease at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And it was right around the time when so that was right before I got my first car. So I was starting to get more into horror, but my dad, can you tell I'm a daddy's girl? Can you tell? He came in and was like, wake up, you got to come watch this movie. Like, I know you've seen, I know you love Grease, but now you got to see Christine. And it was like playing on TV. And then I watched Christine that way for the first time and was like, whoa, this is amazing.
That's awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, so that was one of the first older horror movies I guess I ever saw. Older in quotation marks.
Right. I mean, I guess it is kind of old now. I mean, because like I grew up in I was born in 81, so like the 80s or when I started getting into movies, and now it's so weird to think back on how that is now old movies.
I know. Yeah, I'm the same way.
Whenever I say the word old, I'm like, I'm sorry, whoever I'm offending with the word old in this context. I promise I'm not trying to be rude.
No, but we are further away from the 80s than the 80s were to the 50s at that time. So it's like,
It's weird.
It's old. So speaking of getting older, segue.
Speaking of aging, yes.
What draws you to horror as an adult?
There's several things. I think I personally I mean, I've always just liked spooky things. I've always liked just slightly darker material, whether it's books or movies or, you know, stuff like that. But I do have a lot of just general anxieties in life, a lot of social anxieties, and a lot of that presents itself in weird ways. And I really do feel like horror is a safe space for that, and exercising and kind of experience those things. To be honest, it's the same thing I get from watching just garbage reality TV too, in some ways. Like those confrontations that you see on like Real Housewives, it's like, oh God, I could never do that. So like being able to like experience those situations from a safe space, it's very comforting for me. And I also just love...
You have just made something fucking click in my brain, because I'm doing Real Housewives watch right now, like for the first time. And like it's like horror movies or Real Housewives. And you have just made something fucking go boom in my brain with that connection.
Yeah.
That is so interesting.
I think
Anyway.
that there's something there, Mary, but like for real, because that's, I think, why I like it. Because I like a very sometimes socially, you know, awkward, or I have like a lot of anxieties around social situations, and I have a lot of issues with like confronting people or like expressing my emotions and, you know, not holding them in. And so I think, you know, seeing somebody being able to just like scream really loudly and also like maybe like yell at their friend for doing something stupid on Real Housewives, like there's a connection there, and just being able to like express those emotions in a way. And also, I guess just, I don't, it's weird to think of those two as the same thing, but I think that there's some similarities there for me personally. I also just think that like, well, I love the music, and I love the practical effects, and I love not knowing what's going to come next, and they're just fun too. So I get a lot of it, but if I had to like dig really deep, I think that that's part of why, just the way it allows me to experience some anxieties, I think.
Do you get scared as an adult watching horror movies? Yeah.
I do. And I think it's because I didn't necessarily grow up watching some of them. I think that, you know, that there are still films that like genuinely get to me in certain ways. Home invasion horror is one for me. Even like, there's an episode of the new Lisey's Story where there's, the character puts like a bag over Julianne Moor's head. And like that scares me. Like thinking about somebody being in your house. Like I've had my house broken into in the past, and just like knowing that somebody's like in your house is really terrifying to me. So home invasion gets to me. And also just sometimes like I remember when Sinister came out, that genuinely scared me. So I think that there's moments. I think it takes a special film to do it. But yeah, I do still get scared.
That's awesome. Don't lose that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So was Sinister the last movie to like truly scare you, you think?
I think
or was
so.
there something more recent?
No, I think Sinister was like
sense.
the last one that like genuinely like beginning to end. I was like, I had the lights off and was like, I don't know if I can do this right now.
That movie's upsetting. It really is.
It's really upsetting.
Yeah. And it's, just the way it's done and the way the tension builds and, yeah.
The little vignettes of lawnmowers rolling over people.
I know.
That scene.
That's
just
real.
horrific murder. It's fine.
Yes.
It's fine.
You know, no big deal.
So what are some of your favorite horror movies now?
So some of my favorite horror movies now, I think, well, Rosemary's Baby is one of my favorite movies, but obviously there's some conflicting emotions there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do love that movie, and I love it for a lot of different reasons. But so that's one of my favorite. Christine always has, I think that film is perfect, and I never get sick of watching it. Let's see. I love horror comedies too. I love Blood Diner.
Oh, Blood Diner.
Oh, I need to see that.
I don't know why
I need to
I
see
love
Blood
Diner, but yeah, and I love Evil Dead and Army of Darkness and Scream, and let's see what else. I don't know. It's so funny when like you see something that you're not expecting to really love, but it ends up being one of your favorites. Like Rawhead Rex is another one that I saw maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, and it's become one of my favorites. That one. It's bananas, but it's also
That's
awesome.
what I've heard.
I love 70s horror movies. So like anything that's going to be like Hammer or like The Omen, like there's something about that 70s aesthetic and the pacing. I really love just a lot of those, or like Don't Look Now.
Oh yeah, I have to rewatch that.
Yeah, so I love all that stuff.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier about music, so I want to know, when did you find your interest in music?
I've always had a passion for music. I started taking piano lessons when I was 5, and I played all the way through college, and I majored in music. So music's always been a passion of mine. And I also, I work at a record store, like for my day job. So and I've done that for, 15 years now. So music has always been a passion of mine. And then, when it comes to film, I think it just kind of came later. But yeah, Rosemary's Baby, that's why I said I'd love it for a lot of reasons. That was the first film that I really like. The soundtrack really kind of something clicked for me. And really started paying attention to what was going on, and it got me interested in more. So that led me to really pay attention and start digging into more horror soundtracks. And I think that there's something special about the way that music works in horror films that I think is just so unique, because you're not only dealing with, just being scared, but you're supporting building the tension, and you're, really translating what the characters are feeling and setting up what's going to come next, or, leading the audience a different way to set up a scare. Like it's such an integral part of what makes horror successful. But it can also be really beautiful pieces of music. And I think that sometimes that gets lost. Like the scares sometimes overpower the artistry behind it. And just once I started digging in and really like listening to a lot of these pieces, I was just shocked how beautiful so many of them were. And I don't know, it just kind of snowballed from there.
So I'm curious. So not talking about horror in particular, but talking about film scores in general. I grew up, when I was starting to realize music and the importance of it in movies, it was probably in the 90s for me. I was probably in my teens, and I started to get hit with like a lot of like First Night, the soundtrack to First Night, or Titanic, or all of these scores that like I ended up buying on cassette tape or on CD, or I would listen to. Like this was when I started to realize how, like you said, beautiful scores could be on their own, as opposed to just watching a movie and having music that accompanies it. Now, I am curious, again, let's take horror out of this, because I think horror is a little bit different beast. I feel like film scores in general have not been recently as integral to the movie as they were previously. Like I can't think of, outside of, again, horror, any soundtrack that I've gone out and like actively purchased other than some horror soundtracks. And I'm curious if I'm off in my own little world, if what your thoughts are on the film score today.
I think it's interesting. Yeah, no, I think that's interesting because, you're right. And I think, one of the earliest memories I have of like a film score that just really, I paid attention to, and I think a lot of people probably share this, is Star Wars. But yeah, now I think, especially with big budget movies, like you think about like any of the Marvel universe, like there's so much going on. And so I think that these giant movies, it's easy for them, it's just to get overpowered. Like literally just a couple days ago, we were watching Fast and the Furious 9 with my dad, and I mentioned something about like, oh yeah, Brian Tyler did the score for this. And he's like, oh, I thought it was all just like popular music songs. And I was like, no, like there's a score there too. And he was like, oh, I guess I'll have to pay attention. Like, when did they start doing that? And I'm like, on the third one, 6 films ago. Like, it's only the first 2 that have like pop songs, only pop songs. Like, then after that, there's a score. So I think that that's a good example of just like how it can get lost in a lot of these big budget films. I do think that indie films, smaller, maybe more artsy, for a lack of a better word, I think that that's still there. But especially when it comes to just mainstream movies, I think that they sometimes get overpowered by the visual elements or the action or, just some of what's going on. I do think like There are exceptions, like Parasite, I think. I
Okay,
know that's
yep.
like a borderline film,
Yeah.
but I think Parasite, I think Minari. So I think that there are some exceptions to that rule, especially when they come to dramas. But if something crosses over into the action realm, it really just takes it somewhere else, I think.
And it feels like a lot of the time with scores, it's not even the score, it's like the soundtrack with the songs.
Yeah.
I feel like it's such a big marketing push that I've noticed. And thinking like with Cruella, they were really like pushing the soundtrack list and like the song and the original songs that some of those like artists created. And I feel like that in a way, that was the big thing also, like the 2000s, I remember, because my family loved the Spider-Man movies and we would buy the CDs and like listen to the soundtracks. And that was like such a huge draw. Like I didn't care about the score. I wanted to listen to the songs I knew.
Totally.
So that also is like, seems like a big shift in bigger mainstream movies, because I agree. I think like in dramas and also indie movies and especially horror, which is again a whole different beast, there's a focus on the score. But now it's like the soundtrack song is like a marketing pull more than anything else.
And I do think that there are some exceptions. Like one of the people that I love, one of the kind of, I say up and coming, but he has arrived, would be like Ludwig Göransson. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but he did Creed, he did The Mandalorian, he did Tenet. So I think that there are some people that I think are really going to become the face of like the new John Williams, the new Alan Silvestri or James Horner. So I do think that there are some that are going to kind of stand the test of time and have sold pretty well. And I think like another one would be Brian Tyler. I really do think like he's done all the Fast and Furious. He's done some Avengers. He's doing the new Scream movie. He's done so much stuff. And so I do think that there are some that will kind of cross over into the mainstream, but I do think you're right. I think it does. A lot of the others, it takes film music fans to really kind of rally behind it. But even at the record store, though, I do think that Parasite was one for sure. Because I would have customers coming in who, just regular customers in all sorts of age ranges, and they'd be asking for that. So that might be one of the last ones that I've really seen that seem to cross over into all sorts of demographics.
Well, and I wanted to kind of isolate horror out of that discussion, because I do think horror has been, as you've kind of discussed, has been like really paving the way for film scores. And you brought up Lisey's Story, which I've been watching and doing a podcast with Joe Lipsett. And I love Clark. I got introduced to him with Daniel Isn't Real, and the score for that was phenomenal. And then I read your fantastic interview with Clark, about the score for Lisey's Story. And I was so happy to read that. And this is why I think what you do is so important, because you are bringing light to all of these different scores that I grew up listening to. I grew up listening to horror scores and loving it. And so the fact that passion is still continuing, I think is phenomenal. And Lisey's Story soundtrack is killer, I think.
So good. It's so good. Yeah. And it's so cool that, Clark is doing that. And I love that he was doing it because of Daniel Isn't Real. Like, I loved when he said that, like that the director, Pablo or Lorraine, just loved Daniel Isn't Real. And was like, I want that guy. And it's like, that's awesome to me. And that score is so good. And I love just talking to these composers, because I studied music for a long time, but I came to the realization at one point, it's like I'm not a performer. I don't like writing music, but I'm fascinated by the people who do. Like, I just think it's so magical how you can sit down, at a keyboard or a blank page and like see something on screen and then translate that into a completely different experience.
It's mind blowing.
How the fuck?
Yeah. Like how you
I don't understand. It's witchcraft.
And it's like,
it's beautiful witchcraft.
There's only so many notes, right? Like there's 88 keys on a piano, but just like the incredible versatility that music has, that it's just an endless well of possibilities, and how you're able to tap into certain emotions by different tones and different chord progressions, and like the cultural associations that, different cultures have with different intervals. And like, it blows my mind. So I love getting inside the heads of these people who, do this for a living, because it's so unique to each of them, like what inspires them and their creative process. So it's just eternally fascinating, and no two composers are the same, and, no two projects are the same. So yeah, I don't think I'll ever get tired of talking about it or talking to these people, because every time I learn something new, and every time I hear some new story or some new approach that just, blows my mind every time.
So can you recommend some of your, or, either favorite or some horror scores you would recommend people listen to if they're like listening to this and going, hey, maybe I should listen to some horror scores? Do you have any that you can recommend off the top of your head? Not to put you on the spot.
Oh, good. I got some. Some just like recent ones that I think are really killer would be, so Nathan Halpern did Swallow. And I think that is just such a gorgeous score, and that movie is gorgeous. And it's just like a great example of all the pieces just working so well together to really just create this just beautiful vignette of the story. It's great. Also, there's an artist who goes by the name of Gazelle Twin. She did a film called The Power, which is on Shudder now. It's a newer film. And it's really interesting to me. It's a little out there. It's kind of experimental. It's these electronic things. There's lots of weird vocal stuff going on. Okay. To me, it's just really cool. And the film is pretty fun too. So, you should definitely watch it. I think it works really well, and it adds a lot to that film. As far as older stuff goes, let's see. I do really love a lot of the Italian guys, which is, not surprising. I think a lot of people really gravitate towards that. But anything by Goblin. Oh, yeah. I think Pino Donaggio, I had already mentioned Don't Look Now, but I'm going to drop Don't Look Now again. Also, his score for Piranha is really great. Oh. I know Piranha is kind of cheesy and kind of fun, but like that score, that's an example of a score by itself being really wonderful, and like, wow, this is a lot better than maybe the film deserved. I don't know. So that's kind of fun when that happens. And then Bruno Nicolai is another great Italian composer. And Ennio Morricone. What can you say about him? So. Yeah.
He's okay.
Yeah, he's all right, I guess. Like
overrated.
Like, I don't even know where to start with him. So, but everything he does is incredible. So he's one of my go-tos for sure.
That's awesome.
Cool. Okay. So we've talked about music and horror. But Rachel, what are we talking about today? It's not a movie, but it's a television episode.
It is. So today we're talking about an X-Files episode called Syzygy.
Talk about iconic scores.
Oh my God,
yeah,
right?
No kidding.
Okay, so for those of you who have not seen Syzygy, it is in season 3 of the X-Files. In the episode, a rare alignment of the planets gives 2 homicidal teenage girls dangerous telekinetic powers while simultaneously driving their small town insane with satanic panic. Mulder's interest in the local female detective also makes Scully jealous, and there's a lot of horniness going on.
I love that
so
is
horny.
We pulled this from IMDb, and I love that last line is there. Mulder's interest in local female detective makes Scully jealous. Like, why does that have to be in there? But that's IMDb.
Yeah.
Okay, so take us back to when you first saw this television show. I want to know how old you were, how you saw it, what about it scared you? Because I have questions in particular about that last part.
Yeah, sure. I have such a vivid memory of this, which is so funny now. So this was an example of a babysitting discovery. Okay. I remember it like it was yesterday. I think I was 13. So I couldn't drive because I do remember that the mom had to take me home afterwards. And I had, put the kid to bed and sat down and was just watching some TV. I watched first. This is what set the whole thing up. I was watching, is it America's Most Wanted? Yes, America's Most Wanted. And there was a story about this guy who they were looking for, who would sneak into people's house who left their garage doors open for their pets. I don't know if my parents did this. I don't know if anybody else has seen this though, when people leave their garage door open a little bit. Anyways, he would sneak under there and break into people's houses and had killed some people. So that was the setup.
Oh.
Then So I was already terrified because I thought that was so creepy. And then
you're watching this while you're babysitting.
I watched this while I was babysitting. The kid was in bed, mind you. I was by myself in somebody else's house.
Great. A stranger's home.
Stranger's home.
Stranger's child.
Yeah. And so then after this, the X-Files came on. It just must have been, just Fox or whatever. And it was this episode. And so I was already kind of freaked out. And this came on. And I just, at the time, I hadn't seen a lot of horror. So I hadn't seen a lot of the elements that maybe they were pulling from. And I wasn't even familiar with some of the subjects that they were talking about, like satanic panic. Never heard of it. But just the fact that it was like these teenage girls and the cult, like that really to me was really creepy as like a middle schooler. High school kids I still thought were like really cool and looked really old. And so like seeing these girls, I was like, oh my God, they're so cool. And it was so creepy. But yes, if you want me to talk specifics, there are some specific memories that stuck with me.
Okay, before we do get to that part, I do, because you just brought up the fact that, and I this is starting to click in my head now, because I can imagine being a 13-year-old kind of looking, high schoolers seem ageless. They seem like, the end all be all coolness. So I can understand if you're like 13 years old, you're watching this show where you see high schoolers that are, they're partying, they're having sex, they're like doing these very adult things. And then there's murder. I mean, that gives kind of a conflicted view of what's going to happen in just a few years.
Oh, totally. Also, I had never seen X-Files. I guess I should say that. Like, I had never seen... So this was my first episode of X-Files.
Okay.
Which is also a very distorted view of what X-Files is, for the record.
But also, did that opening sound... how did you react to the opening title music?
Oh, exactly. Yes. No, the whole thing. Like, from the second it started, I was like... Oh God, this is going to be scary. Like, I thought it was going to be scary. And so I was already like in that mindset. And and America's Most Wanted had set me up for it. And then the music, like I was just a sucker for the whole thing.
I remember Friday nights on Fox where like you would lead up with these, America's Most Wanted, or you would have like Cops, or you'd have like all these types of shows, and then it would go into X-Files. And so it's like leading you in to be terrified. Absolutely. Yeah. I completely forgot that those were probably on around the same time.
Yeah. So I think that it was all just a weird mishmash of things. And then there's a couple things specifically in this episode that like tapped into some experiences I had myself. So that just like sealed the deal. Like this was...
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So like I just mentioned, there was the thing about the guy getting into people's garages, right? Mm-hmm. And then in this episode, there's a young teenager who gets impaled by a garage spring, so there was two garage things back to back, and I just thought it was like so graphic, which is so silly now because you look at it and you're like, okay, that wasn't so bad. But that was just so scary to me. And also, something I was shocked about when I was doing just a little tiny bit of research on this is that this came out before Craft. It came out before Scream. Like seeing it as an adult, I thought, oh, clearly they're, playing off of Craft. Oh, this garage thing, clearly they're playing off of Scream. But they weren't, which is wild to me. And then there's also the scene where the two girls are in the bathroom and they're playing Bloody Mary.
Oh.
Yes.
And I had a babysitter growing up. Her name was Janessa. I will never forget. Who did this? She did this.
Oh my God. Okay. Side note, Terry, we got to start some kind of weird ass shit about babysitters because we've had so many good, evil babysitter stories. Like, I don't know what we're going to do, but I want like a shirt. Fuck you, Janessa. Like, we need to make a babysitter series. Anyway.
Seriously.
Okay.
So I remember she was like, remember she's like, oh, do you want to play Bloody Mary? And I'd be like, no, I don't. And she would like put me in the bathroom and be like, Bloody Mary. And I'd be like, stop it. And so that experience happened years before I saw this episode. But then I saw it again and was like, oh my God, it's a real thing. Like it like made it so much worse because I had only heard of this from Janessa, but I knew it was scary. And then it happened again in this episode and just it all came flooding back.
We were talking to
Wow.
Sapphire Sandalo recently, and she was talking about her Scar for Life moment being Dolls, where her babysitter, Melody, locked her in a room with the show on. And so I'm like, what is it with babysitters? Like, you obviously were a good babysitter, but come on.
Yeah, I played like Mario Kart with kids. Like, I don't understand like why.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I made like frozen pizza, and like we'd watch like an episode of a fun show.
Yeah, like I just don't understand like why you would want to do that to kids. But maybe it was a different time. I don't know.
But like, my other thing is, I just always assumed the kids would tell the parents if I did something to fuck them up, and then they would be mad at me, and then I get in trouble with my parents.
Yeah.
Like, and I wouldn't be getting paid anymore, because like a lot of these kids are like regular gigs, and I was like, I don't want them to get mad at me.
Oh, exactly.
Maybe we had our own traumatizing experiences with babysitters, so we were like learn from their mistakes.
It's probably
a new
true.
generation of babysitter.
I think that there's something there for real, because yeah, I never wanted to do that because, God, yeah, Janessa. You know what's funny is she
Damn
grew
it,
up to be
Janessa.
an ordained pastor. So take that as you will. But I will never forgive her for, scarring me with playing Bloody Mary in our bathroom, telling me she's going to come out of the mirror and get me.
People grow into just weird things. You're like, wait, you're a pastor now?
Yeah, it's still weird.
Wow. Anyway.
Yeah, so that
wow,
really
a lot with that episode.
And the bleachers.
Oh,
like that's something that it's so funny. There's a lot of things from this show. Like it stuck with me for years, but I'm sure you guys have experienced this where you have a memory, but you don't necessarily know exactly what it's from. But there's like that and the bleachers scene was one of those things. Like I never quite knew where I had that memory from or where it came from. But then years later, when I was, getting into X-Files and I was watching all of them, I got to this episode and was like, holy shit, like that's what it's from. I thought I made it up. I don't know where it was. Like I never remembered where I saw it. And it just like suddenly clicked that it was X-Files this whole time.
So that's so fucking funny that it happened exactly to me watching it today, because I was a couple days ago, I was like, what show? I was watching something for Chattanooga Film Festival about basketball, and I was like, what fucking thing has the guy getting trapped behind the like, I was like, where is that? And I forgot that it was this episode. I was
weird.
like, where did that come from? Like, where is that? And then I watched, I was like, holy shit, this is where that's from. So I had the exact same thing of like, what?
Yeah.
Yep. Because I grew up watching the X-Files, and I'd seen this episode before, but didn't really like remember a lot of it. So watching it today, I was like, that really just dug into my brain and just like sat there.
Seriously. I think that that's part of it, because the episode overall is not like the best X-Files episode, but I do think that it's got some really great like moments. So I think that that's part of it. Like it's got these beats that it's like, holy shit, like that's what's happening, like crazy. But then the in-between stuff, kind of like the Mulder Scully stuff, is actually kind of the least interesting part of this episode.
It's such a weird tonal shift, I feel like, because it's like, but I also love this because I love Scully being a sassy bitch, like her sure fine whatever. Like I have it screen capped, and like I love that image like all the time. But it's like it feels like this kind of weird, serious, culty vibe, and then you have this very weird relationship drama going on between Scully and Mulder, and like that's going on the whole show. And like I know that every episode kind of has its own little field monster of the week, but it always so like throws me off a little bit when we have these very kind of more explicitly romantic episodes between Mulder and Scully. Yeah. And this is one of those episodes where I was like, oh, I don't like it so much when they do this in the show.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about the home episode with Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. So we've talked a little, I've mentioned this before, but I didn't really get into X-Files because at the time I didn't have really a way to record shows with DVR wasn't invented yet, and VHS tapes. My dad, it was like a whole thing if I wanted to like record something. So I would catch an episode every now and then, but bringing it back to music, I was in band and I was in marching band, and so we had a lot of games to play Friday nights when this was on. So there was a whole lot of episodes that I missed, but I would catch them once in a while, and I do not remember seeing this one in particular. But so I don't have any thoughts of this as a kid, other than I remember watching some X-Files episodes and it being like, ooh, gosh, this is going to be creepy and this is going to be my, Friday night scare. But I don't have any thoughts of this as a kid, other than I remember watching some X-Files episodes and it being like, ooh, gosh, this is going to be creepy and this is going to be my, Friday night scare. But watching this as an adult, this is a very weird episode, and not really. And again, because I have not been sucked into X-Files. So like, I know a little bit about it. I know a little bit that like Mulder and Scully have that will they, won't they vibe. I know that there's Monsters of the Week episodes sometimes that have nothing to do with the mythology. And then there's some mythology episodes. So I know like the bare minimum, but I was not prepared for coming into this. And all of a sudden it opens up with Mulder and Scully just bickering, just like at each other's throats from the very beginning. I'm like, I don't remember them being like this.
No, and I don't think that they are a whole, like, it's definitely turned up in this episode. And I think that the logic behind it is like, oh, there's weird events going on in this town. There's weird vibes, like, you know, atmospheric vibes that they're feeling. And so it's kind of accentuating all these things that have been kind of going on in the previous, you know, 2 seasons. But yeah, it's very strange and not the best representation of their relationship at all.
No, and I was wondering about you in particular, because you said that this was your introduction to X-Files, and I can't imagine this being like my intro to the series, because it's nothing like the episodes that I remember watching. And so,
yeah.
What did this interest you at all, or what was your relationship to X-Files after watching this episode?
I think I was in a similar position as you were. Like, I couldn't watch it at home because it wouldn't be allowed. And then, yeah, I was in marching band, and like, you know, as I got older and like, you know, Friday nights I'd be busy, and yeah, I couldn't record it or anything. So I didn't see it I didn't start watching the series all the way through till probably my early 20s. And by that time, they were available like on DVD and stuff.
Right.
So I didn't see it when it was actually playing on TV. So I don't think it really, it didn't hook me. It wasn't like, oh, now I gotta like make sure to watch this and like make sure to like be home or tune in. Like it did not hook me. I can tell you that, but it scared me, I guess.
Yeah. This seems like a satire. Like, I feel like this is kind of satirizing the 80s in particular, and like the 50s, because the 80s again was like a representation of the 50s. So like, when I was watching this, I'm still trying to parse my thoughts about this, because like I was watching this going, I don't understand what they're trying to say here. And then I watched this episode twice because I was like, I don't really know what to talk about with this episode. But then I started realizing that the opening scene has this guy named Boom, who goes by Boom, who's played by Ryan Reynolds, by the way.
Wild. Yeah.
Like, what?
That is something I did not realize till I rewatched it.
Yeah.
Just for this, you know, I was like, oh, wait, that was Ryan Reynolds. Like, holy shit, did not remember that.
That's like, very brief side note, that's the best part about going back and watching this now. Like, all the people who had very small roles in like individual episodes. It's amazing.
Seinfeld too is a good one for that.
So, but okay, so we're introduced to the central conflict at this like memorial, and Boom is talking about how like we need to go kick butt for Bruno, or I don't even remember what the guy's name is that died before this. I don't even think it's necessary to know. But he's wearing his like leather jacket. He has like this the hair, and it feels like the 50s is filtered through the 80s being presented in the 90s. Like, it is such a weird amalgamation of time periods. It feels like this episode is sort of a satire of sort of the satanic panic that started in particular in the 70s and 80s, but like that high school kind of sex comedy, because the way this starts to unfold with the 2 girls being like, oh, the cult's going to kill virgins. I'm a virgin, you know, like, it feels like a sex comedy.
Sorry, I want that recorded and have that for everyone. I'm a virgin.
So it feels like that's kind of what it's pulling from, though, is that sort of like high school sex comedy that was so popular in the 80s.
Oh, I agree. 100%. I think that's exactly what it is. And then just kind of the 90s trend, because that I think that really comes back. We see a lot of those, you know, comedies and horror, a lot of that teen stuff coming back. So I think it was just tapping into kind of that trend that really was just sort of starting around this time. But yeah, I do think that it was just playing off that satanic panic and trying to be really like a funny X-Files episode, but also just not really succeeding.
Okay, thank you. Because I was like, like all the things are like, especially with like the mob with like the torches, like going like he killed the kid, or they find his bag in the river, and like what was the fucking dog's name? The bones of
Mr.
the dog.
Tippy.
And she had to, Mr. Tippy. Had to come identify the I'm like, it's so like the ideas are funny, but it was not executed well in terms of comedy. So I was like, is this just really poorly written for the X-Files? Like, did they not know what they were trying to do?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because it was not a good horror comedy. Like, let's just put it like that. It was just not it felt like they were trying to do horror comedy, but like did not know.
No, it's
how to execute.
The tone on this is all over the place. Like, it would have been so cool if they had like really leaned into the horror element. Like, it could have been really cool. But at the same time,
right?
They kind of did this weird comedy thing that they were trying to do between Skulder and Mully. Because I think at this time in the franchise, there was
Skulder and Mully. You said Skulder and Mully, and I love it. I was like, I'm going to do that. I love it.
Skulder.
Hey,
Skulder and Mully.
The like couple names wasn't very big at the time, but
the
now
OTPs.
Those OTPs, they would be Skulder or Mully. Maybe
I
think Skulder is better.
Skulder's better.
I like Skulder better. We all know they exist out there on the internet. Yeah. We all know they're there.
But I think that they were really trying to like, because I think the fans at that point, it was really one of those like, will they, won't they things. And so I think it was a lot of like in jokes for fans of the franchise up until that point. But if you're like me, I had never seen any of the other ones. So it was lost. and even then, I don't think it was really, now that I am a fan of the franchise, I still don't think it's that great. It's like, good job, guys.
I was wondering because as I was watching this, I totally didn't find anything funny about it except for like random lines that just were popped out. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of funny. But I didn't think of it as a comedy until I started to do some like research into it and like reading reviews of it. And I found some that were talking about how it was supposed to be one of the more comedic episodes of X-Files. And I was like, oh. And that's why I ended up rewatching it and watched it twice. Because like, did I miss something the first time? Because I was looking for something. Well, first of all, I was looking for something scary because I was like, okay, so what is the scene? Because I'm always curious, what is the scene that like did this? And I kind of thought that maybe it would be the garage scene because that's like literally the only scene in the episode that like I thought was even frightening. But I was like, I don't see this as a comedy.
No, I don't think it is. And yeah, I can admit that this is not very scary. I think I was just in the right frame of mind, and my poor little innocent head had just like never quite seen something like this. Mm-hmm. Although I will say, I do love these two girls in it.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I was gonna say I love these girls though. Like I am so mad they didn't do just like all on these girls, like more focusing on these two girls because they're incredible character. Like they are incredible, and I want a Jennifer's Body style movie about the two of them.
Yeah,
very badly.
I think that they look great and they're dynamic together, and just like the hate him. Like, wouldn't want to date him, and just like
I know I was.
Oh, you spilled drinks on me. We're gonna crush you. Crush you. Bleach.
But like it is this. But like it's such like it's the high. It's like the high school bitchiness taken to the best extreme.
Oh, totally.
Like, I knew girls who did that shit. Like hate her and like that petty shit. And then what they could have done if they had this telekinetic power.
Oh yeah.
Like, that's what's so scary because like I know plenty of girls who would have done that shit if they had these crazy powers. And like at the beginning too, when it's Boom and he's hanging and they're panning up the rope and he loves me, loves you not, and like they're just sitting there like plucking the petals off, and they're so devious and shitty and amazing, and they're gonna kiss at one point when they lean in and like boop noses, and like that is like the best scene to me in the whole episode of when they're just like giggling maniacally.
Oh, totally,
like little shitty teenage witches, and it's just so good.
Oh yeah, and I loved that, and I think that it's the same reason why I was really attracted to like all these later movies that would come out like Scream and. I Know What You Did Last Summer and all that, is that there was an element of like sexiness to this episode, I think. Like, this episode's horny. Can we just it is from everybody. And I think that also like made it feel dangerous to me. And just seeing these girls, and then as they get like, a little bit wilder with their hair and their makeup and their outfits, I was just so in love with them. Like, to me, they were just like so cool.
Well, you kind of talked about the mentioning the hair, and that's what like kind of started to clue me in that this was sort of like an 80s throwback, because all of a sudden the hair got bigger. It reminded me of like this sort of like punk aesthetic of like the 80s, where everyone had the big hair and, you know, and acting like these two characters. And also, side note, the fact that Terry is played by Lisa Robin Kelly, who would go on to be Laurie Foreman in that 70s show. So talk about like little one-note characters in X-Files that would have like bigger careers later. Laurie Foreman, right there.
I know, and she had just such a sad story on her own, though. Because I think she passed away under sad circumstances.
Oh, did she?
Yeah.
Oh,
I
Jesus.
think there was some drug-related stuff there. But yeah, it is good. It's cool to see her in this, and then seeing her as in that 70s show. And also the other woman, Wendy, she was in Wishmaster, so...
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And she did a lot of other stuff too, but when I saw that on her credits, I was like, oh yes, Wishmaster. So that's always fun to see that kind of stuff. But yeah, I love their dynamic. And I do think when I was rewatching it for this, that Lisa Robin Kelly, it's like she totally could have been in The Craft and been one of those girls, like no problem. Like, I love Fairuza Balk, like, do not get me wrong. But if it wasn't her, I think actually Lisa probably could have pulled it off.
Oh, she could have. Absolutely.
Yes. Just looking at her picture and thinking like, yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Mary Beth, you mentioned the scene where the camera's tilting up and he loves me not, and it looks like they could almost kiss. Am I the only one that got kind of queer coding from these two characters?
1,002,000,000%.
Okay.
Like, it felt like they were just like, it felt like the extreme of like girls who play with boys and like they're our boyfriends, but it's mostly just like they're manipulating them because they can, and they have this newfound power and they're using it to their advantage. But I definitely got that kind of like, are they best friends or are they more than that? I got that vibe a lot. And I wish they had leaned more, into it and just having them be queer, because that would have been like an even cooler inversion of that whole like teenage sex comedy, Satanic Panic, these like evil young girls, and they're actually queer. And that would have been, I think, a really cool twist on the story. But again, it is the 90s. This isn't from the 90s, episodes from the 90s. I think.
Yeah,
96.
90s, early.
I started thinking about, first of all, we're talking a little bit about how this kind of might have pulled from inspirations from other movies. I do think watching this, that Tragedy Girls kind of pulls from this dynamic of these two characters.
I do need to see that.
Oh, Tragedy Girls is so
I've not
good.
seen Tragedy
Have you seen
Girls.
it?
Yeah,
I've
Rachel?
heard
it's wonderful.
And those two characters are also, I mean, I wrote an article about it. Those two characters in my mind are textually queer, but it feels like a pulling from this dynamic here. And particularly the scene that kind of clued me in on it was there's a moment towards the end of the episode where they're doing that hate him, thing. And Terry says hate him. And then Margie says nothing because maybe she has feelings for him, it seems like, or maybe she's more interested in him than just a plaything. And then she's like, hate him, like trying to get Margie to go along with her. And she doesn't. And then that is what sparks the kind of final confrontation between the two in the garage, because all of a sudden Margie might be interested in the boy that they've been just kind of playing with. That is where that final like climactic moment that scared you with the spring from the garage killing poor Scott. But it's that kind of that situation that it started making me think about Tragedy Girls, because they go through a very similar kind of relationship spiral where they're very jealous of other boys' attention with their other person, and then they end up like having to kill people and that kind of stuff. But this scene, it was like, okay, this is really, and maybe it's one of them more so than the other, but Terry is obviously in love with Margie, in my opinion. And this moment of like Margie finally not reciprocating that relationship and going for the man is what like sparks the final confrontation between the two of them. But you're right, they do not, I don't think they lean into it enough. And that might be my biggest complaint about the episode as a whole. Is not leaning into what they're setting up as much.
I mean, I'm with you on that. I think it would have been so much more interesting and powerful if they did. Just because I think you're right. Up until that moment where Margie just doesn't say anything. They were in it together. You know, they were killing all of these boys, just these boys together. And yeah, it would have been so much more interesting. I do think you can read it also as just, there's a way to read it as both, I think, queer and just women's interpretation of like young blossoming women, I guess. Just the power that can hold in society, and how, you know, these two young women aren't behaving in ways that the rest of their small town would deem as like appropriate. And so, you know, it's like a witch hunt. It's literally like a witch hunt. It would have been interesting to see that more, a queer lens like turned up a little bit, for sure.
Well, and that's the other thing that I'm kind of alluding to, because I want to talk about this as well. They seem to bring up aspects or hint about aspects, but then don't really go into it. And the other big aspect of this is the idea of satanic panic. And we see how this town gets kind of sped up with this like idea of like, there is a Satanist here. We must find him. We must kill him. The fact that it's the principal of the school that's like all of a sudden lost his marbles and is so focused on rooting out the Satanists in their backyard. But the show kind of introduces this idea of the other in here with the doctor. They find that bag that you were talking about, and the bag has the doctor's initials on it. And so then the mob goes storming on his door, and we see him rushing down the stairs with women's high heels, with a woman's robe, and with lipstick on his mouth. So obviously he is a queer character. And he is the person that this mob has put their ire on. So it's like all of a sudden we sort of introduce this, and then it's kind of played for laughs, where Mulder's at the police station. He's like, someone's wearing the perfume I really like. And it's obviously not one of the two women, because it's this doctor character that has already been seen to the audience as being queer coded. So they bring this other aspect of it, but then they don't really do anything with it.
Yeah, it's very weird. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something too that went over my head the first time I saw it. And then I rewatched that and I was like, oh, why is that in there? That's very strange. But I think you're right. I think it's the idea of just, the others in society, whether it's, you know, women who aren't behaving like how young women are supposed to be behaving, or this, you know, this doctor who, you know, is queer, and just how society can turn on them so fast and then make up complete conspiracies around it. Like, that's what is also interesting to me, is that, you know, they pull open the bag and they're like, it's baby bones. Right. And like, oh, they're killing baby. And it's like, nobody said that. Like, you are completely just fabricating and using this false narrative to fit your agenda.
Yes.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. Weird, right?
Yes.
Weird.
Kind of continuing what you're saying. Yes, they definitely seem prone to make up things, because even before that, when they're digging around in this guy Harvey's backyard, he's like saying, well, maybe Harvey's got something to hide. We got two kids who are prepared to say they took them on a camping trip and made them play naked movie star games. What? First of all,
my favorite.
What?
I love my favorite game.
I was going to ask
Naked
you
Movie
guys.
Star.
That's exactly what I put. I put naked movie star games ? Because I don't like, what does that mean?
You've heard of reindeer games with Rudolph, but have you heard of naked movie star games? I think not.
Wow.
I wish I knew a movie star to ask.
Girl,
like,
same.
What are these games you play in the woods?
That hilarious line aside, it's the idea that we have two kids who are prepared to say. It's not that we have two kids that were involved with this. It's all of a sudden they're prepared. And that has a different connotation, because again, we are looking for some person that is not acting like the idea of what a small town should be, that is acting outside of it. And that is who we must put our eye on. We don't know who Harvey is. He doesn't show up at all in this episode. And yet the only thing we know is that he maybe took people on a camping trip, and maybe something salacious happened, but maybe not, because who knows? Because we're just making shit up at this point.
Oh, yeah. And it's the girls that are fueling it. So you can read a lot into that. Like, the girls made up this whole narrative about the cult. They're the ones telling the story about, like, oh, yeah, and then they brought out this baby and the knife, and they're all dressed. Like, they're the ones making
An unmarked masquerade of babies.
So,
Black cloaks.
you know, there's that Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Just the fact that like these people who are creating and fueling this, story are actually the ones who are responsible for the whole thing.
Well, and that's something I was thinking a lot about too, because this could have very easily been like it kind of is a little bit like the evil of teenage girls, but then at the end, when the clock hits midnight and all of the psychic energy finally dissipates, they're sobbing in the corner, and the guy is like, "It was Satan."
Yeah.
Like, it was just like, these young girls couldn't be capable of, like, he had a shotgun, like, ready to just fucking kill them. And then all of a sudden they're crying in the corner and he's like, "It was the devil."
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's very interesting how they were like, it's both, there's this interesting narrative about how these young girls are able to manipulate this entire town, but then the town isn't necessarily able to, I read it as they weren't able to totally process or like accept that young girls had manipulated them like this and had committed these crimes, that they couldn't possibly be like that.
Exactly.
Because it was like these girls were obviously acting of their own volition and were just given some sick ass telekinetic powers that I always wanted as a kid, I will say. I wouldn't have killed people. Probably. But it is so interesting how it's this interesting story about how two young girls are just absolutely fucking with this town, and the town doesn't believe it was them.
I know.
love that.
Or like really them.
No, I think you're exactly right.
It's kind of rad, and I wish they'd done a little bit more with that, but at the same time I did like they weren't just like, oh, evil teenage girls, like they're terrible and ruin everything, but it's more like, look at the power that they exercised over these older men, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Which was pretty.
Yeah, it's very, yeah.
And they're not just killing anyone needy. We're killing boys.
Yes.
I just couldn't stop thinking about Jennifer's body. I got such Jennifer's body vibes a little bit, so.
I do love that about this episode too. Just like knowing what's going to come afterwards. It's like, it's pretty cool to me how they were able to kind of preempt all of that with like this trend that would totally go on. Like, I think the only really thing that came out before this that I can really compare it to would be Heathers. And I mean, I'm positive they drew some influence from that, but just the amount of female empowerment films and like the way that, young teenage females are going to go to be represented in horror in the oncoming, like even 5 years, I think is really fascinating that this was right there at kind of the beginning of it.
And like you said, this came out in 96. Like, it was before a bunch of those movies. So it is so fascinating to see how X-Files really is always kind of on that edge of really cool shit. Like, even if it's not necessarily done well, it is interesting to see how that show really was kind of like on the cutting edge of some of that horror stuff. Not always, but some, like, I just fucking love the X-Files. I grew up watching the X-Files. I grew up with a child of divorce. Both households loved the X-Files. So like, it was just X-Files all the time.
And I will say, like, for me personally, this was a really great kind of soft intro into the world of teen horror because I hadn't really seen any of that before. Like, and so there was a lot about it that I thought was so cool. Like, yeah, it scared me, but as a young, 13-year-old girl in middle school, like, this really was just so cool for me personally to see these young women just having this power and this friendship and like, yeah, fuck those guys. And like, yeah, we're gonna, just like you said, manipulate all these people and make up this story. Like, that was really cool to me because I felt like, I could never do something like that. Like, I could never like have that sort of power and that relationship. So I think that it really just resonated with me and I thought it was so cool. And I'd never seen any of these other films. So it was cool to see it for me. And a Ouija board. I had never seen a Ouija board used in a film before. So, and they did that in there too, which I thought was really cool.
Can we talk about the $300 exposition dump?
Oh, I kind of loved that astrologer.
Zervinsky, I think is her name.
Well, yeah, whatever it was. I thought she was really funny. Like, I love when, just the fact that she won't, like, tell them anything, and she's like, no, pay me, bitch. Like...
And not only that, but I have to make sure the credit card goes through, because I know how you government types are.
The government never has money. I'm making sure this card goes through first. Like...
But I just love that, like, she's like, once every 84 years, Mercury, Mars, and Uranus come into conjunction. But then Uranus is in the house of Aquarius, and things are going to fall out of the sky. Disaster lays in wait. We're in a geological vortex, a high-intensity meridian. And then my favorite line of the entire episode, a cosmic G-spot.
Mm-hmm. I really wish I knew somebody who was like super into astrology and that kind, because I want to know, like, is this real? Because I don't know.
The cosmic G-spot?
Yeah, like, is this whole Syzygy? Is this like, it would be interesting to know like how much of this is just like TV writing bullshit, or if it's like a real thing. But yes, it's such a ridiculous little like monologue to set up like why the girls have the power, and like, oh, if you were born on this day, like, forget about it.
You could tell me that shit and I'd be like,
Oh, exactly.
Astrology is just like over my fucking head.
Yeah.
And people explain it to me and I'm like,
Sounds good.
Yep.
Sounds great.
Sun, moon, earth signs, houses, retrograde. I'm like,
Yep.
okay.
It forms a cross.
I have not heard.
And you get all that power.
I have not heard. Okay, so I have a couple friends who are really into astrology. I have not asked them specifically about like that kind of stuff, like do my hand motion, like like invoke. But they don't. I've never heard them talk about like that kind of thing, about like planets aligning and like powers.
But
arising.
have they ever talked about the cosmic G-spot?
I have not heard about the cosmic G-spot, so I will inquire about the cosmic
Please do.
G-spot. Hi, have you ever heard of the cosmic G-spot? Can you tell me where it is? Can you help me locate? Is it the prostate? I'm so sorry.
That's the P-spot. But that line also does kind of... God, that line also does kind of tie into the horniness of the episode, as we've talked about, though, because I love that Mulder goes over to the detective's house and is like, maybe you can help me solve the mystery of the horny beast. And then that line comes up later as she's knocking on his hotel room door and is jumping him to like jump him, and she's like,
I don't know what he's like, I'm drunk, I don't know why I never drank, and she's like, I'm feeling very strange, and then she just leaps on top of him.
Which, okay, also, by the way, taking orange concentrate and just pouring that into a vodka bottle,
that's okay. I have never heard of this like screwdriver hack, but it looks disgusting.
It sounds terrible.
Like concentrates, just like, I forgot that I used to make things out of concentrate out of those cannons. I forgot that I had like banished that out of my brain until today.
Yeah, I've never heard of that, and if that's a real thing, like, oof, I don't know. I guess it does fit Mulder's character a little bit, but ugh, so gross.
That was a wild moment. I was like looking at this going, do people ever do that? Because I remember putting like Jolly Ranchers into a Zima, but like that's the extent of my like bizarre juice mixing.
Put Jolly Ranchers into a Zima.
Yeah.
That's good.
Tell me you're old without telling me you're old. Just kidding.
Oh no! Someone take it. Wait.
Zimas are back.
Wait.
Zimas are back now. It's fine.
Oh yes!
Just for you, Mary Beth. We got some laughter just for you. Some canned laughter.
Yes. Nailed it.
Okay.
Anyway, do we want to wrap up and give us our rating out of 5?
Yes.
5 cosmic G-spots. No.
Hey, Terry, how many cosmic G-spots? Wait, what happens if there's more than one cosmic G-spot?
Ooh, baby.
Oh, I don't want to know.
Just a bunch of
Or do I? This is devolved. How many cosmic G-spots are you giving this one, Terry?
I would love to give it 5. I would love to give it 5 cosmic G-spots because more G-spots for everyone. But I I don't think this is a great episode. I don't know what it is about this episode, but it seems like all of the ingredients are here, but they're not put together appropriately. There's some really fantastic lines. I love some of the snappy dialogue that we get that I do think kind of influence like what I mean, like it surprised me that this comes out before Scream, because there are some of that snappy kind of bitchy kind of queer dialogue moments where it's like she's like carpe PM, you know, there's like moments like that are really kind of funny, but they're not tied together interestingly enough. Like that we have the satanic cult aspect, but it's not explored enough. We have this idea of this cosmic alliance, but that is literally just used as like an exposition dump that's not explored. We have this potential reading of these girls that might be queer, might not be, might just be kind of bitchy teenagers. You don't know, but none of this is really explored in any interesting way. It just sort of is there. And it makes me kind of sad because like I do think there are some very fascinating things here that if they had put it together a little bit better, might have hit more. But as it is, this is not what I'm going to look back to when I think of X-Files. This is not a home episode. This is not like I think it's called Ice 9 with the thing that is like the thing in the backs of their people's necks. This isn't the thing that I'm going to think about when I think about X-Files. That was a lot of abouts. So for me, I think it is a 2.5 G-spots. I don't want to cut that G-spot in half, but here we are. What about you, Mary Beth?
I'm also going to give it 2.5 G-spots, so we can just take the halves and put them
There you
together
go.
like the world's most perverted
5.
best friends necklace. But I agree with you. I agree with a lot of what you're saying, because it feels like they either had like different writers write different parts, or they had like a bunch of chunks that they kind of wanted to put together, but it was all written separately, so it didn't come together like in a cohesive package. Like they should have picked one thing and stuck with it. So, you know, they've tried to make me laugh. I just was very confused, but I really loved these two girls, these two characters. Like I would watch a series about those two, like their telekinetic hijinks in their town, or I think those were really well written, cool characters that I would have loved to see more of. So I think those two women are the saving grace of the episode, because it definitely is not a super memorable X-Files episode, but I love talking about it with you, Rachel, because it's so cool to hear like your very specific connection with it is so cool, and that's why I love this podcast. So yeah, 2.5 cosmic G-spots. So Rachel, you have the final word. How many cosmic G-spots are you giving Syzygy?
Syzygy? Yes. I agree with everything you guys are saying. It's wild to me. Like, now, as an adult, I'm a huge X-Files fan. I love this series. But I think that this episode would be better without Mulder and Scully. Like, if this was just, like, a film or something. Like, if it was, just like you just said, a series about these girls. Like, it's actually the X-Files part of it that kind of takes away from it, which is so weird. So because of that, I'm giving it 3 cosmic G-spots, but mainly just because it had, like, it's got such a weird nostalgia notch in my heart, because I have such a weird specific memory of it, and but I can totally admit that it was the situations surrounding it and where I was literally in that moment at time watching it, that it hit me the way that it did. But I still do love a lot about it. And yeah, watching it now and just, the bleachers, the garage spring, the birds falling from the sky, like those moments, I just remember how much they scared me and like stuck with me. And you know, every time I'm in a garage and I see those springs, I'm like, oh God, they could fly off at any minute, you know? So like, that's still like, I still think about that if I see those kind of springs. And so it's just weird that it's this silly little episode of X-Files that's not even that great, that for some reason just left such a mark on me. But I love these girls. I love the actresses together. I think their performances are great. And I would love to see more of this, about how 2 girls just harness and embrace their young feminine power to just manipulate a whole town into a satanic panic frenzy. Like, I love that, and I would love to see that. But, you know, maybe Scully and Mulder can sit it out.
Yeah.
Yes.
This one out, guys. We don't need you here. We don't need you to solve the problem.
No.
We just want to watch it.
We just want to watch the girls burn the city to the ground.
Yes, please.
and be super hot and queer at the same time.
That's all I want. Really? I want to watch super hot queer girls burn towns to the ground and kill boys.
Yeah, it's really
that is exactly what I want.
So much to ask. Come on.
So specific. I love it.
Maybe some naked movie star games. I don't know.
Please.
Maybe we can find out what those are.
Yes, please. Will some celebrity reach out to us and let us know? What kind of naked movie star games are you participating in? And why is it such a secret?
I also want to say it's good to know I did learn something in this. So if I ever am in an interrogation, that I'll make sure to state my GPA while I'm being interrogated.
Yes.
Because
I was dying. I
never knew that was important, but apparently it is. So I hope you guys
flex that
yeah,
GPA.
I hope you guys wrote that note. So just in case.
Yeah. I'll do that now. I'll be like, I'll remember my GPA from college. Make one up. Anyway.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us to talk about this episode of The X-Files, Syzygy, which we're going to have to do a lot of de-essing about. But where can our listeners find you? And what do you have that you'd like to share that you might have coming up?
Sure. So you can find me on both Instagram and Twitter. I'm at Vinyl Girl GRRRL. And I'll have some pieces coming out on Rue Morgue and Vehlinggo in the next little bit. I'll have an interview with Jeff Grace, who did the score for Sweet Tooth, which is on Netflix. Ooh. And is really just so cute and wonderful. So if it's lovely. I highly recommend it if you're in for, want a little detour from the horror stuff. And then I also have an interview up right now on Rue Morgue with Patricia Day of the Horror Pops. And she's incredible. So if you want to check that out, that would be wonderful as well.
And we'll throw some links up in the show notes for everyone to go check some of this stuff out.
Yeah. And then you can also catch me on the Losers Club podcast here and there. Lots of cool stuff coming down the pike there. So yeah, we're on the Bloody Disgusting Podcast Network.
Yeah, congrats for that, by the way. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah. We're very excited. Happy to be there in wonderful company. Mm-hmm. So it's truly an honor to be a part of that team, and it's such a perfect home for the pod. So yeah, we're all thrilled.
Awesome.
Sweet. So listeners, you heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What is your experience with Syzygy? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Syzygy. I'm Gaily Dreadful.
Damn it, I was going to make that joke and then I didn't. Damn it. And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thanks everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time, keep saying Syzygy.
Syzygy.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.